The Bright Futures Gala was no longer a celebration. It had become a stage for humiliation. Scarlet stood at the center of the storm, her hand pressed gently against her swollen belly, the white silk of her gown glowing under the chandeliers. Around her the murmurs grew into a symphony of scandal. Some whispered in pity, others in awe, but every pair of eyes was fixed on her. Jonathan thrived on spectacle, but Scarlet's silence was unnerving him. He had expected tears, anger, maybe even a dramatic exit. Instead, she stood tall, her posture regal, her eyes burning with quiet defiance. Cassandra shifted uneasily, suddenly aware that the room was no longer admiring her. For the first time all night, she felt like a shadow. "Scarlet?" Jonathan sneered, raising his voice to drown the whispers. "You were never built for this world. You think being my wife makes you special? You've been a burden, holding me back while I fought for our future. Cassandra understands ambition. She knows how to stand beside a man like me." The cruelty was deliberate, each word sharpened to wound. Scarlet's breath caught, the pain twisting inside her chest. The child within her stirred as if sensing the storm, but she refused to crumble. Instead, she met his gaze head-on, her voice steady though soft. "A man like you doesn't deserve to be stood beside." Gasps erupted. Guests leaned forward, their curiosity electric. Scarlet's words had pierced through Jonathan's armor, and for the first time, his smug smile faltered. Cassandra clutched his arm tighter, her nails digging into his tuxedo, desperate to steady his unraveling composure. Jonathan's face darkened. "Careful," he hissed, his voice low but caught by microphones nearby. "You don't want to make a scene." Scarlet let out a small, bitter laugh. "You already did that for me." The orchestra, sensing the tension, had long since fallen silent. All that remained was the charged air between husband and wife, mistress and mother, betrayal and dignity. Scarlet turned to the crowd, her eyes sweeping across the sea of glittering faces. "I stood by him through everything," she said, her voice cracking but unbroken. "I gave up my work, my dreams, my life, and tonight he tells me I was a burden." Her words carried the weight of countless women who had been silenced, forgotten, dismissed. In that moment, she wasn't just speaking for herself. She was speaking for every wife who had sacrificed too much for a man who gave too little. The audience shifted, discomfort rippling through them. Even those who had come to sip champagne and gossip felt a pang of shame. Jonathan tried to laugh it off. "Don't play the victim, Scarlet. No one here buys it." But they did. The looks of sympathy directed at Scarlet, the cold stares cast at Jonathan, told a different story. Cassandra's smile twitched, her confidence slipping. She hadn't signed up to be booed in whispers, or to be photographed looking petty beside a woman glowing with resilience. Scarlet steadied herself, tears brimming, but refusing to fall. "You may have money, Jonathan. You may think you have power, but what you'll never have again," she paused, her hand firm on her belly, "is me, or our child's respect." The words landed like a thunderclap. Jonathan's face drained of color. For once, he was speechless. Cassandra looked as though she wanted to disappear into the floor, and the audience, oh the audience, erupted into murmurs that would become tomorrow's headlines. Across the room, Gabriel Knight watched with sharp, unwavering eyes. He had seen powerful men crumble before, but never under the weight of a woman's truth. Tonight, Scarlet had drawn a line in the sand, and Gabriel knew the moment had come for him to step out of the shadows. As Jonathan reached for Scarlet's arm to drag her away, another hand intervened, strong, steady, and ready to defend her at all costs. Jonathan's hand shot forward, his fingers closing around Scarlet's arm. The force wasn't enough to hurt her physically, but it was enough to send a clear message. Control. He wanted to drag her away, to silence her, before her presence dismantled the carefully constructed image he had built. But before he could pull her from the spotlight, another hand intervened. It was firm, steady, and undeniably commanding. "Let her go." The voice came from Gabriel Knight, his tone low but edged with steel. The crowd shifted as though sensing the arrival of a new force. Jonathan's eyes narrowed, his ego bristling at the interruption. He turned to face Gabriel, the tall man with dark hair and a quiet presence that carried more weight than all the chandeliers in the room combined. "And who the hell are you?" Jonathan spat. Gabriel didn't flinch. He didn't need to raise his voice. His calmness was its own kind of power. A man who doesn't stand by while a pregnant woman is manhandled. The room erupted in whispers. Cameras flashed furiously, hungry for the confrontation. Jonathan's grip loosened under the pressure of so many watching eyes. Scarlet stumbled back, her strength wavering after the heated exchange. She pressed a hand against her belly, trying to steady her breathing. Gabriel was at her side instantly, his hand lightly brushing her back to support her without taking away her dignity. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly, his voice filled with genuine concern. Scarlet nodded, though her eyes shimmered with exhaustion. The emotional toll of Jonathan's betrayal, the weight of the pregnancy, and the suffocating atmosphere of hundreds of eyes. It was too much. Her body trembled, her knees weakening beneath her gown. The crowd gasped as Scarlet swayed. Gabriel caught her before she could fall, lifting her with surprising gentleness. The sight struck everyone. A woman betrayed, carried not by the man who should have loved her, but by a stranger who treated her like something sacred. Jonathan's face twisted with rage. "Put her down, she's my wife." Gabriel turned his head slowly, his eyes locking onto Jonathan's. "You forfeited that right the moment you humiliated her." His words were calm, but they cut sharper than any blade. Scarlet buried her face against Gabriel's chest, trying to hide the tears finally escaping her eyes. For months, she had carried her pain in silence. Tonight, it had spilled over. The orchestra sat frozen. Guests whispered furiously. Even Cassandra, once smug and confident, looked suddenly small, clutching her glass with trembling fingers. "Take her home," someone whispered in the crowd. "She doesn't belong here." But Gabriel shook his head, addressing no one in particular yet, commanding everyone's attention. "She belongs wherever she chooses to stand, and tonight she will not be erased." The words hung in the air, electric, undeniable. Scarlet's tears slowed, her breath steadying as she listened. For the first time in months, she felt protected, not like a burden, but like a woman worth defending. Jonathan lunged forward, but a group of onlookers stepped in subtly, blocking his path. His power was slipping. Every second Scarlet leaned on Gabriel's strength was a second. Jonathan lost his grip on the narrative. Scarlet pulled back slightly, meeting Gabriel's gaze. There was something in his eyes she hadn't expected. Understanding, empathy, and a pain that mirrored her own. It was as if he knew what it meant to lose, to hurt, to carry scars invisible to the world. "Why are you helping me?" she whispered. Gabriel's jaw tightened, his eyes softening as he replied. "Because I know what it feels like to love and lose, and I won't stand by while you're destroyed." The confession struck something deep inside her. Before she could respond, Jonathan's furious voice rose above the murmurs. "This isn't over, Scarlet. You'll regret crossing me." Gabriel shifted, his arms still steady around her, and said words that would silence the entire ballroom. "No, Jonathan, the only one who will regret tonight is you." The ballroom still buzzed with whispers, but Scarlet's world narrowed to the man holding her steady. Gabriel Knight wasn't like the others in the room. He didn't wear arrogance like armor. His presence was quiet yet commanding, his strength tempered by a gentleness that unsettled Jonathan more than open defiance ever could. Scarlet, still trembling, studied him. His jaw was strong, but there were lines etched into his face that no amount of wealth could erase. They weren't from stress meetings or corporate takeovers. They were the lines of a man who had carried grief. For years, Gabriel Knight had been a mystery to New York's elite. A billionaire who shunned the limelight, he rarely appeared in magazines or gossip columns. He never flaunted yachts or mistresses. Instead, he built quietly, investing in industries that created jobs in forgotten towns, supporting charities without attaching his name. Rumors swirled. Some said he was eccentric, others said he was hiding something. The truth was simpler and sadder. Gabriel had known poverty. He grew up in a Rust Belt town where the factories had long since gone silent. His father worked double shifts at a warehouse until his back broke down, and his mother cleaned houses to keep food on the table. Gabriel learned early what it meant to go without luxuries, without comfort, sometimes even without dinner. But what they never lacked was love. His parents gave him that in abundance, and it shaped him more than money ever could. Through scholarships and relentless determination, Gabriel clawed his way through school. He worked nights in diners, shoveled snow in the mornings, and studied until dawn. By the time he graduated from business school, he was exhausted but unstoppable. Every dollar he made, he invested carefully, building slowly, methodically, until his fortune eclipsed even those born into dynasties. But wealth wasn't the crown of his life. That belonged to Elena, his wife. They met in their 20s when Gabriel was still rough around the edges, and Elena was the anchor who steadied him. She saw not his hunger for success, but his heart. For years they built a life together, modest at first, then grander as his wealth grew, but always grounded in love. Until the diagnosis. Cancer. Relentless, merciless, and indifferent to money. Gabriel poured everything into saving her. Specialists, treatments abroad, experimental therapies. But no empire, no fortune, no ambition could stop the inevitable. Elena died in his arms, leaving a void no amount of success could fill. From that day, Gabriel withdrew from the spotlight. He refused to let tabloids exploit his grief. Instead, he buried himself in work, but not for vanity. He built schools, hospitals, shelters. He carried Elena's memory in every act of kindness, every life improved by the wealth he no longer needed for himself. And yet, despite the years, the grief remained etched in his soul. He had loved once and lost once. That pain never left him, which was why, when he saw Scarlet, radiant but breaking, betrayed yet standing tall, something in him stirred. He recognized the loneliness in her eyes, the fight to survive while carrying the weight of a world determined to crush her. Scarlet didn't know all of this as Gabriel steadied her in the ballroom. She only felt the safety of his hand, the sincerity in his gaze. But others knew. Whispers spread quickly. That's Gabriel Knight, the reclusive billionaire. Didn't he lose his wife? The crowd's perception shifted. This wasn't a stranger intervening. This was a man with scars of his own, a man respected even in silence. Jonathan bristled, hating how quickly the tide turned. Cassandra leaned in, her whisper sharp and venomous. Why is he protecting her? Jonathan's eyes narrowed, rage boiling beneath the surface. Because he's about to make the biggest mistake of his life. And as the orchestra struck a nervous note to mask the tension, Gabriel finally released Scarlet's arm, only to step forward, preparing to face Jonathan head-on. The confrontation had shaken the ballroom, but the weight of it pressed hardest on Scarlet. Her steps grew unsteady as the orchestra's uneasy notes faded behind her. Gabriel noticed immediately. Without hesitation, he guided her gently out of the main hall, down a quieter corridor lined with gilded mirrors and velvet drapes. Away from the flash of cameras and the sting of whispers, Scarlet could finally breathe, or so she thought. The moment the heavy doors closed behind them, her composure cracked. Scarlet leaned against the wall, her body trembling. The white silk of her gown clung to her frame, her hand instinctively protecting the curve of her belly. For hours she had carried herself with dignity, but alone, the truth spilled through the cracks. "He humiliated me," she whispered, her voice breaking. "In front of everyone, in front of our child." Tears slid down her cheeks, hot and unrelenting. "And I let it happen for too long." Gabriel stood a step away, giving her space, but the ache in his chest deepened with every tear she shed. He had seen powerful men reduce women to shadows before, but seeing Scarlet, so strong minutes ago, now collapsing under the weight of betrayal, struck something inside him he thought had long died with Elena. "You didn't let this happen," Gabriel said softly. His voice wasn't pitying, it was firm, grounding. "He made his choices, cruel choices. That doesn't make you weak." Scarlet shook her head, her sobs catching in her throat. "I gave him everything. My career, my time, my love. I believed in him. And he?" She stopped, choking on the words. "He made me feel like I was nothing, like I was disposable." Gabriel's jaw tightened, his own memories rushing back. He remembered the helpless nights sitting at Elena's bedside, hating that all his power and wealth meant nothing. He had felt useless, powerless. And now, watching Scarlet unravel, he recognized the same wound, the belief that love given selflessly had been wasted. He moved closer, his hand hovering before finally resting on her shoulder. "You are not disposable, Scarlet. You are carrying life inside you. You walked into that ballroom tonight and silenced a room full of people who expected you to stay hidden. That is not weakness. That is strength." Scarlet lifted her eyes to him, glistening with tears. "Strength doesn't stop the pain." "No," Gabriel admitted. "But it gives you the power to turn pain into something greater. Something no one can take from you." For a moment the world stilled. Scarlet studied him, not just his words but the raw honesty in his eyes. He wasn't a man seeking advantage or attention. He wasn't Jonathan, building empires to feed his ego. Gabriel spoke like someone who had known love, loss, and survival. Someone who understood. Her sobs softened into shaky breaths. She wiped her cheeks, embarrassed by her collapse. "I don't even know why you're helping me," she whispered. "You don't owe me anything." Gabriel hesitated, his eyes darkening with the memory of Elena. "Maybe I'm helping because I couldn't save the woman I loved. But tonight, I won't stand by and watch another woman be destroyed." Scarlet's lips parted, the weight of his confession settling between them. She didn't know what to say. Gratitude, confusion, and something unspoken tangled inside her chest. Before either could speak again, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed down the corridor. Scarlet stiffened, her hand tightening on her gown. The muffled voices were unmistakable, Jonathan's, sharp with fury, and Cassandra's, dripping with venom. And as the doors rattled under their push, Scarlet realized the private sanctuary she had found was about to be shattered once again. The corridor door swung open with a force that rattled the hinges. Jonathan stormed in, his face flushed with fury, Cassandra trailing behind him with a smirk that could slice glass. The quiet sanctuary Scarlet had found vanished in an instant, replaced by the storm she had just escaped. "There you are," Jonathan spat, his eyes blazing as they landed on Scarlet, then flicked to Gabriel. "Hiding in a corner with another man while you humiliate me in front of my peers? How dare you?" Scarlet froze, but Gabriel stepped forward, placing himself squarely between her and Jonathan. His stance was calm but unyielding, his presence filling the narrow corridor. "You humiliated yourself," Gabriel said evenly, "and you won't lay another finger on her." Jonathan laughed bitterly, though the sound carried no joy. "Do you even know who I am? This is my wife, my reputation, my life, and you." He jabbed a finger toward Gabriel. "You're nothing but a stray desperate for a spotlight." Cassandra slinked closer, her voice laced with venom. "Oh, Jonathan, don't waste your breath. Men like him swoop in when women are weak. He's using your wife's tears to make himself look like a savior." She turned to Scarlet, her tone mocking. "Pathetic, really. You thought you could play goddess tonight, but look at you. Broken, leaning on another man while carrying a child from someone who doesn't even want you." Scarlet's chest tightened, her hand instinctively clutching her belly. The words stung because they pressed against her deepest fears. But Gabriel spoke before the poison could sink further. "Careful," he warned, his voice low and cutting. "Mocking a mother while she carries life says more about you than her." The confidence in Gabriel's tone silenced Cassandra momentarily. Jonathan, however, stepped forward, his anger boiling over. "Stay out of this, Knight. This is between me and my wife." "She's not your possession," Gabriel shot back. His calm demeanor barely masked the steel in his voice. "She's a woman, a mother, and you've treated her like dirt in front of hundreds of people. That ends now." The words hung heavy in the air. Scarlet blinked, stunned by the conviction in Gabriel's defense. For months she had been silenced, gaslighted, made to feel invisible. Yet here was a man, a stranger until tonight, who refused to let her be erased. Jonathan scoffed, masking his unease with arrogance. "You think you can swoop in and play the hero? Scarlet belongs to me, and when this baby is born, the world will know it carries my name, not yours." Scarlet flinched at the cruelty, but Gabriel remained steady. "A child doesn't need your name, Jonathan," he said firmly. "It needs love, something you clearly have no idea how to give." For the first time, Jonathan's mask slipped. His jaw tightened, his fists clenching at his sides. The fury that had always been Scarlet's private nightmare now threatened to spill into public violence. Cassandra tugged at his arm, suddenly less confident as she realized the cameras might follow even here. Scarlet found her voice, trembling but resolute. "You've taken enough from me, Jonathan. Tonight, you don't get to take my dignity too." Her words sent a shockwave through the corridor. Jonathan's eyes blazed, and for a moment, Scarlet thought he might strike. Gabriel shifted instantly, his body shielding her, his eyes locked on Jonathan's with a promise of consequences. The silence stretched, thick with danger. Then Jonathan hissed, "You'll regret this, Scarlet. Both of you will." And as he stormed closer, hand raised in fury, The sound of hurried footsteps echoed. Security was on their way, and everything was about to explode. The tension in the corridor was suffocating. Jonathan's hand hovered mid-air, his rage boiling over, ready to crash down on Scarlet the way it had so many times in private. But before the blow could land, a sharp voice cut through the chaos. "Mr. Colton, step back." Two members of the gala's private security team appeared at the end of the corridor, their black suits crisp, their expressions unflinching. The echo of their footsteps filled the silence, each step a reminder that Jonathan was no longer the untouchable king of the room. Jonathan froze, his arrogance colliding with the sudden reality that he was being watched, judged, not just by Scarlet and Gabriel, but by outsiders with authority. His hand lowered reluctantly, but his eyes still burned with fury. "This is a misunderstanding," he said smoothly, slipping back into the charm that had fooled so many for so long. "My wife is emotional. We're simply having a private conversation." Scarlet's breath caught at the word emotional. How many times had he used it as a weapon, to dismiss her pain, to silence her voice, to make her feel small? The fury welled up, but before she could speak, Gabriel's voice sliced through the air. "Private conversations don't involve raised hands." His tone was calm, but the steel in it made even the security guards glance at him with respect. Jonathan's jaw twitched, his polished mask slipping again. "You don't get to lecture me. You don't know me." Gabriel's eyes narrowed. "I know men like you, and I know what happens when no one stops them." The corridor buzzed with whispers as more guests edged closer, drawn by the commotion. Phone cameras appeared, recording every second. Jonathan's nightmare was becoming reality, his carefully curated image unraveling in real time. Cassandra hissed under her breath, "Jonathan, everyone's watching. Stop this." But Jonathan couldn't stop. His pride wouldn't allow it. He turned on Scarlet, his words cutting like glass. "Do you see what you've done? You've made me a laughingstock. You've dragged me down in front of everyone." Scarlet straightened, her tears replaced by a spark of defiance. "No, Jonathan, you did that yourself." The crowd gasped, the words echoing louder than any slap could. For the first time, Scarlet didn't shrink under his anger. She stood against it. And Gabriel, steady at her side, made sure she didn't stand alone. Security moved closer, their hands ready but cautious. "Sir," one guard said firmly, "you need to calm down. If this continues, we'll have to escort you out." The threat was unthinkable for Jonathan Colton, a billionaire, a titan of industry, to be treated like a misbehaving guest. His face twisted, caught between fury and humiliation. He glanced at the growing crowd, realizing the cameras were capturing every flicker of his rage. If he exploded now, his empire would pay the price. Cassandra tugged his arm desperately, her whisper sharp. "Jonathan, stop. You're making it worse." For a long, tense moment, Jonathan stood frozen, his chest heaving. Then, with a forced laugh, he raised his hands as though surrendering. "Fine," he said, his voice strained. "If the lady wants to play the victim, let her. But this isn't over." He turned sharply, brushing past the guards, dragging Cassandra with him. The crowd parted, their eyes cold, their whispers merciless. For the first time, Jonathan walked away not as a conqueror but as a man shrinking under the weight of disgrace. Scarlet exhaled shakily, her body trembling with the aftermath. Gabriel's hand remained steady at her back, grounding her. "You did more than stand your ground," he murmured. "You won tonight." Scarlet shook her head, tears threatening again. "No," she whispered. "This is only the beginning," because as Jonathan disappeared into the crowd, he wasn't retreating, he was plotting. And Scarlet had no idea just how far he was willing to go to destroy her. The gala continued in fractured fragments of music and murmurs, but for Scarlet, the night had ended the moment Jonathan stormed away. The glittering chandeliers, the swirling gowns, the scent of champagne, they blurred into a haze of exhaustion and humiliation. Her body trembled from the weight of everything she had endured. Gabriel guided her out of the ballroom, through a side corridor that led to the quieter lounge reserved for VIPs. The noise of the crowd faded with every step until all that remained was the sound of her own uneven breathing. The lounge was dimly lit, its velvet couches and golden accents meant for whispered deals and secret rendezvous. Tonight, it became a sanctuary. Scarlet sank onto a couch, her hands cradling her belly protectively. For the first time since she had walked into the gala, she allowed herself to exhale. Her body ached, her heart throbbed with betrayal, and her spirit, though not broken, felt dangerously close to shattering. "I shouldn't have come," she whispered, her voice raw. "I thought if I showed my face, if I proved I wasn't afraid, it would matter. But all it did was make me a spectacle." Gabriel remained standing for a moment, watching her with quiet intensity. Then he lowered himself into the seat across from her, his voice calm and steady. "No, Scarlet, you didn't make yourself a spectacle. He did. You walked into that room with dignity, and you left it with more strength than most people will ever know." Scarlet let out a shaky laugh, bitter and weary. "Strength doesn't stop the whispers. Tomorrow, every headline will paint me as the pitiful wife who was replaced." She swallowed hard, her tears threatening. "And my child will grow up to read those words." Gabriel leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees, his gaze locked on hers. "Headlines fade. What matters is the truth, and your child will grow up knowing their mother stood tall when the world tried to push her down." The conviction in his tone startled her. For months, Scarlet had been drowning in Jonathan's voice, sharp, dismissive, cruel. Now, sitting across from Gabriel, she felt something different. Belief. Not pity, not condescension, but genuine belief in her worth. Her chest tightened, not from pain, but from the unfamiliar warmth of being defended. She studied him, the quiet strength in his eyes, the scars of a man who had lived through battles of his own. "Why are you doing this?" she asked softly. Gabriel's jaw tightened, his answer simple but heavy. "Because no one should fight a war like this alone." Scarlet's lips parted, her breath trembling. The words lodged in her chest, stirring something she wasn't ready to name. She lowered her gaze, her hand smoothing over the curve of her belly. For tonight, it was enough to know she wasn't alone. But reality pressed in quickly. She thought of Jonathan's parting words. This isn't over. He was not the kind of man who accepted humiliation quietly. Scarlet knew the battle had only just begun. "I don't know how much more I can take," she whispered, her voice cracking. "He has money, power, connections. I have nothing." Gabriel reached across the table, his hand covering hers. His touch was firm, grounding, unshakable. "You have more than you think," he said, "and if you'll let me, I'll make sure Jonathan Colton never hurts you again." Scarlet looked up, stunned. The intensity in Gabriel's voice left no room for doubt. This wasn't a polite offer. It was a vow. And as the lounge doors creaked open again, revealing a shadowed figure slipping inside, Scarlet realized that her fight for dignity was about to take a dangerous new turn. Jonathan Colton didn't leave the gala to lick his wounds. He left to plot. Humiliation was something his ego could never tolerate, and tonight Scarlet had delivered it in front of the very people he sought to impress. The whispers, the cameras, the icy stares, every second replayed in his mind like poison. He stormed into his limousine, Cassandra sliding in after him, her expression tight with worry. "Jonathan," she began cautiously, "maybe we should." "Don't," he snapped, his voice sharp enough to silence her. He poured himself a glass of whiskey from the minibar, his hand trembling not from fear but from fury. "She thinks she can stand against me? She has no idea who she's dealing with." Cassandra shifted, her confidence wavering. For the first time, she questioned whether aligning herself with Jonathan was worth the cost. But greed was a stubborn thing, and she pushed her doubt aside. "Then show her," she whispered. "Show everyone." Jonathan smirked, dark and cruel. "Oh, I will." The car sped through the city streets, neon lights streaking across the tinted windows. Jonathan pulled out his phone and made a call. Within seconds, a voice answered, deep, efficient, the kind of voice that belonged to someone who thrived in shadows. "It's time," Jonathan said flatly. "I want everything on Scarlet, bank accounts, medical records, her design business, whatever scraps she left behind. I want her destroyed, publicly and permanently." There was a pause. "Understood. And the man with her tonight?" Jonathan's jaw clenched. "Gabriel Knight. Dig deep. He thinks his money makes him untouchable, but I know men like him. There's always a weakness. Find it." As the call ended, Jonathan leaned back in his seat, his rage cooling into something far more dangerous: calculation. Scarlet had embarrassed him. Now he would strip her bare in front of the world, leaving her with nothing. Cassandra watched him, unease creeping into her chest. She had wanted Jonathan's world, the power, the spotlight, but she hadn't expected this level of cruelty. Yet when his eyes flicked to her, sharp and suspicious, she plastered on a supportive smile. "You'll win, Jonathan. You always do." He downed the whiskey, his grin returning. "Winning isn't enough. I'll make sure she begs to crawl back. And when she does, I'll crush her." Meanwhile, in the quiet lounge at the gala, Scarlet had no idea of the storm gathering against her. Gabriel sat across from her, steady and composed, but inside he was already calculating too. He had seen Jonathan's kind before, men who believed wealth excused cruelty, and he knew Jonathan would not stop here. Scarlet pressed a hand to her belly, her voice low. "I don't want to fight him, Gabriel. I just want peace for my child." Gabriel's eyes softened, but his reply was firm. "Sometimes peace comes only after you stand your ground." The door to the lounge creaked open, and the shadowed figure from before stepped fully inside. It was Margaret, Jonathan's longtime secretary, her silver hair pulled tight, her eyes darting nervously. Scarlet stiffened. "Margaret?" The older woman hesitated, then stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mrs. Colton, I shouldn't be here, but you need to know, Jonathan isn't finished. He's already moving pieces against you." Scarlet's blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" Margaret wrung her hands. "He asked me weeks ago to start gathering documents, bank statements, contracts, anything he could use to strip you of financial independence. Tonight's embarrassment, it will only make him escalate." Scarlet's breath caught, her world spinning again. Gabriel rose slowly, his gaze narrowing. "Why are you telling us this now?" Margaret swallowed hard. "Because I've worked for him long enough to know the destruction he leaves behind, and because—" She paused, her eyes wet. "Because you don't deserve what's coming." Before Scarlet could respond, Margaret slipped a folded envelope onto the table, the first piece of evidence against Jonathan, and whispered, "Hide this before it's too late." The envelope sat on the table like a ticking bomb. Scarlet stared at it, her fingers trembling as though even touching it would set off an explosion she wasn't ready for. The room felt colder, quieter, the velvet drapes swallowing every sound. Gabriel's eyes never left the envelope, his jaw tightening with the intuition of a man who knew the weight of secrets. "Open it," he said gently. Scarlet hesitated, fear and curiosity warring inside her. For years, Jonathan had held all the power, financial, social, emotional. She had never been allowed to ask questions, and now here was a chance to glimpse the truth he had buried. Slowly, she slipped a finger beneath the flap and pulled out the contents. Inside were photocopies of documents, bank transfers, contracts, emails. At first glance, they looked like the usual noise of a billionaire's empire, but as Scarlet flipped through, her eyes widened. "These are offshore accounts," she whispered. Gabriel leaned closer, scanning the papers. "Not just accounts. These are shell companies, and not small ones." His finger traced a line of numbers, staggering in size. "He's been funneling money, tens of millions, out of his companies into hidden entities. This isn't tax evasion. This is fraud on a scale that could topple him." Scarlet's hands shook as she gripped the papers tighter. "He's been hiding this while telling me we couldn't afford basic things. He told me we couldn't buy a house for my parents, couldn't support my designs, couldn't even get a decent car." Her voice cracked, pain lacing every word. And all this time, he was hoarding millions. Tears burned her eyes, but this time they weren't from weakness. They were from rage. For the first time, Scarlet felt the fire of vindication, proof that she wasn't crazy, proof that Jonathan's lies had been deliberate, calculated. Gabriel studied her, recognizing the shift in her posture. This was no longer a woman broken by betrayal. This was a woman awakening to the truth. "These documents are powerful," he said. "If they're real, Jonathan isn't just cruel, he's criminal." Scarlet looked up, fear flickering. "If I use them, if I expose him, what happens?" Gabriel's expression hardened. "You gain leverage, for your safety, for your child's future, but it won't be easy. Men like Jonathan don't go down without a fight." The weight of his words pressed on Scarlet, but instead of collapsing, she straightened. For so long, she had been forced into silence. Now in her hands, she held Jonathan's undoing. She turned to Margaret, who lingered near the door, her face pale. "Why did you risk this?" The older woman's voice trembled. "Because I watched what he did to you, and because I've seen what happens to people who cross him. But I couldn't live with myself if I didn't try to help. You deserve a chance." Scarlet's throat tightened, For the first time in months, someone from Jonathan's world had chosen her over him. It was a fragile lifeline, but it was enough to steady her. Gabriel placed a reassuring hand on Scarlet's arm. "You're stronger than you know, and now you have proof. This is the beginning of his end." Scarlet exhaled slowly, her fear transforming into resolve. She folded the documents carefully, tucking them into her clutch as though she were placing a sword back in its sheath. "Then we use this," she said quietly. "We use it to protect my child, to take back everything he stole." But before Gabriel could respond, the lounge door banged open again. A young man in a staff uniform stumbled inside, his face pale with panic. "Mrs. Colton," he gasped, "you have to leave. Now. Jonathan knows someone betrayed him. He's already looking for you." Scarlet clutched the documents to her chest, realizing the evidence that could save her might also be the very thing that destroyed her if Jonathan caught her with it. Scarlet's fingers clutched the documents so tightly her knuckles turned white. Every instinct screamed at her to run, yet her feet felt rooted to the carpet. Gabriel noticed her paralysis instantly. He rose to his full height, steady and commanding, his presence like a shield against the chaos closing in. "Scarlet," he said firmly, his voice cutting through the panic, "we have to move. Now." The young staffer who had delivered the warning glanced nervously over his shoulder. "He's already sending men through the corridors. They'll check every lounge, every exit. If they find you with that envelope—" His voice broke. He didn't need to finish. Scarlet's pulse thundered. For years she had been trapped in Jonathan's world of control and fear, but never had the danger felt so immediate. She pressed a hand protectively against her belly. This wasn't just about her anymore. Her child's safety depended on what she did next. Gabriel placed a steadying hand at her back. "Trust me." She nodded shakily, and together they slipped out of the lounge. The corridor stretched ahead, lined with gilt-framed portraits and ornate sconces that cast long shadows. Every sound, the echo of heels, the rustle of fabric, felt amplified. Scarlet's heart pounded with the rhythm of footsteps behind them, each one closer than the last. "Here," the staffer whispered, leading them toward a service staircase hidden behind a velvet curtain. "Few people know about this exit. It leads to the loading docks." They descended quickly, Scarlet clutching the railing, Gabriel's hand hovering close in case she faltered. The dim stairwell smelled faintly of dust and steel, a sharp contrast to the opulence above. For a moment, Scarlet allowed herself to believe they might make it. But halfway down, voices echoed from below. "Jonathan's men." Scarlet froze, panic rising. "They're here." Gabriel caught her arm, his grip firm but reassuring. "Look at me," he said, his voice low and steady. "You're not alone. We'll get through this." Something in his tone calmed her enough to keep moving. At the landing, Gabriel spotted another door, unmarked and slightly ajar. He pushed it open, revealing a narrow hallway lined with crates and catering supplies. It wasn't elegant, but it was a way out. They hurried through, the staffer leading the way. Scarlet clutched the envelope to her chest, every step a reminder that what she carried wasn't just paper, it was power. For the first time in years, she wasn't running from Jonathan. She was running with something he feared. Suddenly, the hallway lights flickered. A tall shadow loomed at the far end, one of Jonathan's men, blocking their path. His expression was cold, his hand reaching toward the earpiece in his ear. "Found them," he muttered. Scarlet's breath caught. Gabriel stepped in front of her instantly, his broad frame shielding her from view. "Keep moving," he ordered the staffer without looking back. "But," Scarlet began. "No," Gabriel said firmly. "You and the baby come first." The guard advanced, his footsteps deliberate. Gabriel's stance shifted, calm but ready. Scarlet could see it now, the quiet strength of a man who had fought battles before, not in boardrooms but in life itself. The staffer pulled Scarlet toward another side door, his voice urgent. "This way. Hurry!" Scarlet hesitated, torn between fear for Gabriel and fear for her child. Her chest heaved, her tears threatening. "Gabriel." He turned his head slightly, his eyes locking with hers. "Go. Trust me." Scarlet's heart wrenched, but instinct pushed her forward. She let the staffer guide her through the door, clutching the evidence like a lifeline. Behind her she heard Gabriel's voice, calm and unshaken, as he faced Jonathan's man. "If you want her, you'll have to go through me." and as the heavy door slammed shut between them, Scarlet realized she might have just left Gabriel to fight her battle alone. The heavy door shut with a metallic thud, leaving Gabriel alone in the narrow hallway with Jonathan's enforcer. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, his suit stretched tight over muscles that hadn't been earned in a boardroom. His eyes were flat, merciless, the eyes of someone who didn't question orders. Gabriel stood his ground, his heart pounded, but not with fear. It was focus, the kind that came from years of hardship. He had faced worse storms than this. Poverty, loss, the death of the woman he had loved more than life itself. Compared to that, one of Jonathan's hired fists was nothing. "You don't want to do this," Gabriel said evenly, his voice calm but resonant in the echoing corridor. The man sneered. "Mr. Colton wants the wife, and what Mr. Colton wants, he gets." Gabriel's lips curved in a faint, humorless smile. "Not tonight." The guard lunged, his fist swinging wide. Gabriel sidestepped with surprising agility, his movements precise, economical. The punch smashed into the wall, plaster cracking on impact. Before the man could recover, Gabriel drove his shoulder forward, slamming the guard into a stack of crates. They toppled loudly, the sound reverberating down the hall like thunder. The man staggered, but he wasn't finished. He roared, grabbing a broken piece of wood from the wreckage, brandishing it like a weapon. Gabriel squared his stance, his expression unreadable. He wasn't fighting for pride or ego. He was fighting for Scarlet, for the unborn child she carried, for the chance to protect what Jonathan had tried to destroy. The guard swung again. Gabriel caught the blow, twisting sharply until the weapon clattered to the floor. A swift strike to the ribs followed, then a shove that sent the man crashing into the wall. The impact knocked the wind out of him, his breath wheezing in ragged bursts. "You're wasting your life protecting a coward," Gabriel said coldly. "Find a better man to serve." The guard glared but didn't rise. He had underestimated his opponent. Gabriel, despite his wealth, still carried the grit of the boy who had fought his way out of poverty. The scars of his past had forged him into steel. Gabriel didn't linger. He turned quickly, moving down the hallway toward the side exit where Scarlet had been led. His mind raced. Was she safe? Did Jonathan already have men waiting outside? He couldn't afford to let her slip from his protection now. As he reached the door, muffled voices drifted in, Scarlet's, trembling but firm, the staffer's, urgent. And then, another voice, one Gabriel recognized instantly, Jonathan's. Gabriel froze, his blood running cold. Jonathan had moved faster than expected. He wasn't sulking in his limousine anymore. He was hunting. Pushing the door open a fraction, Gabriel peered into the dimly lit loading dock. Scarlet stood with the staffer, the envelope clutched against her chest. Jonathan loomed just a few yards away, his expression twisted in rage. Cassandra hovering at his side like a viper ready to strike. Two more guards flanked him, their posture menacing. Scarlet's voice shook as she tried to stand her ground. "Stay away from me, Jonathan." Jonathan's laugh echoed against the steel walls. "You think you've won? You think a piece of paper changes anything? You're nothing without me, Scarlet. Nothing." Scarlet pressed her hand protectively to her belly, her tears brimming but her chin raised. "I am not nothing. Not anymore." Jonathan took a step closer. "Give me the envelope, or I'll take it myself." Gabriel pushed the door open fully, stepping into the light, his voice ringing out like a blade. "You'll have to go through me first." The air in the loading dock was thick with tension, colder than the ballroom, yet burning with hostility. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting long shadows across steel crates and polished concrete. Scarlet clutched the envelope against her chest, her pulse hammering as Jonathan advanced with predatory calm. Then Gabriel stepped out of the shadows. His figure was tall, steady, unshaken, every movement deliberate. The moment Jonathan saw him, his smirk faltered. "You again," Jonathan spat. "Haven't you caused enough trouble tonight?" Gabriel's eyes locked on his, unflinching. "The trouble is yours, Jonathan. You humiliated your wife, and now you want to silence her. But tonight, she's not alone." The crowd of staff members who had trickled into the dock whispered nervously, their phones subtly raised. This was no longer a private confrontation. It was becoming a spectacle that Jonathan couldn't control. Cassandra stepped forward, her voice sharp and venomous. "Scarlet, stop this nonsense. Hand over those papers before you ruin everything. Do you want your child to grow up in poverty? Without Jonathan? you'll have nothing. Scarlet's hand tightened protectively over her belly. Her voice trembled but held steady. I'd rather have nothing than raise my child in a world built on lies. Jonathan's face twisted. He turned his fury back on Gabriel. You think you can swoop in like some savior? Do you know who I am? I built an empire from the ground up. Gabriel's voice was calm, almost quiet, but it carried across the dock like a thunderclap. So did I. But I didn't build mine by breaking the people who loved me. The words struck deep. Jonathan lunged forward, but Gabriel stepped into his path, their chests nearly colliding. For a tense moment, it was billionaire against billionaire, but the difference was written in their eyes. Jonathan's burned with arrogance, Gabriel's with conviction. One of Jonathan's guards moved to intervene, but Gabriel lifted a hand, his gaze sharp as steel. If you touch her, he warned, nodding toward Scarlet, you'll regret it. Every one of you. The guard hesitated, unsettled. Gabriel's reputation preceded him, quiet, elusive, but powerful. Unlike Jonathan, his wealth wasn't tied to scandal or manipulation. He was respected, even by those who didn't know him personally. Jonathan tried to laugh, but the sound was brittle. What's your angle, Knight? You want her? You want to play father to my child? Gabriel didn't blink. I want her safe, I want her free, and yes, I want her child to know what it means to grow up with dignity. Scarlet's breath caught, her heart twisting. The words weren't a declaration of love, not yet, but they were a vow, stronger than anything Jonathan had ever given her. Jonathan's fury exploded. You'll regret crossing me, both of you. He lunged, his hand reaching for Scarlet's clutch, but Gabriel was faster. He blocked Jonathan's arm, twisting it sharply until Jonathan staggered back with a cry of pain. The dock erupted in gasps, the bystanders' cameras flashing like lightning. For the first time, Jonathan Colton looked small, vulnerable, defeated. Scarlet stepped forward, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. This ends tonight, Jonathan. No more lies, no more control. Jonathan glared at her, his chest heaving. You think you can beat me with a few papers and a new bodyguard? His gaze cut to Gabriel. I'll destroy you both. But before he could strike again, a voice boomed from behind the crowd. Authoritative, commanding, impossible to ignore. Jonathan Colton, step away. We need to talk. It was a man in a dark suit, flashing a federal badge. The dock fell into stunned silence. The man in the dark suit stepped forward, his badge gleaming under the flickering fluorescent lights. His voice carried the weight of authority, sharp and undeniable. Jonathan Colton, he repeated, we need to talk. For the first time that night, Jonathan froze, not out of rage, but out of fear. His eyes flicked from the badge to the man's face, then to the crowd of staffers and guests, their phones raised, recording every second. He had thrived on attention his entire career, but this was a spotlight he couldn't spin. Scarlet clutched the envelope tighter, realization dawning. Margaret's warning, the documents, the offshore accounts, it was all connected. Jonathan wasn't just cruel. He was dirty. Jonathan forced a laugh, though his voice cracked. This is ridiculous. Do you know who I am? The agent's expression didn't shift. Yes. And that's why we're here. We've been investigating your companies for months. Fraud, embezzlement, money laundering. That envelope your wife is holding, his eyes flicked to Scarlet, might be the final piece we need. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Cassandra's face drained of color. She tried to step back, but Jonathan's grip on her arm tightened like a vice. Don't move, he hissed under his breath. Gabriel stepped closer to Scarlet, his presence steadying her as her knees threatened to give way. This wasn't just a personal battle anymore. It was a war on a scale she had never imagined. Jonathan snarled, his arrogance cracking under the pressure. This is a setup. She's behind it. He jabbed a finger toward Scarlet, his voice desperate. She's framing me because she couldn't handle losing her place at my side. Scarlet's breath hitched, but Gabriel spoke before she could. No, Jonathan, you framed yourself with your greed. The agent nodded. We have enough to take you in for questioning tonight. I suggest you cooperate. Jonathan's fury ignited again. You think you can parade me out of here like a criminal in front of all these people? His voice rose to a shout, his face red with rage. I built this city's future. Without me, half of them wouldn't even have jobs. But his words rang hollow. The crowd that once fawned over him now whispered in disgust. Some even stepped back, as though afraid his corruption might stain them. Cassandra yanked her arm free, her survival instinct stronger than loyalty. "Jonathan, I didn't sign up for this," she spat, her voice trembling. "You never told me about the money." Jonathan turned on her, his voice venomous. "You were happy to spend it, weren't you? Don't you dare play innocent." Scarlet watched, her chest tightening. For years she had endured Jonathan's wrath alone. Now the world was finally seeing it too. The agent signaled to two other men in suits, who stepped forward with handcuffs. Jonathan backed up, wild-eyed, his bravado collapsing. "You can't do this. I'll ruin you, all of you." Gabriel's voice cut through, low but powerful. "You already ruined yourself." Scarlet felt her throat tighten, a strange mix of fear, relief, and disbelief swirling inside her. For so long, Jonathan had been untouchable. Now, under the harsh docklights, he looked small, cornered, desperate, and finally vulnerable. The agents reached for him, and Jonathan thrashed like a trapped animal. "Scarlet!" he roared, his voice cracking. "This isn't over. I'll drag you down with me if it's the last thing I do." But before the agents could secure him, Jonathan twisted free and bolted toward the exit, straight in Scarlet's direction, his eyes burning with one last act of vengeance. Jonathan's footsteps thundered against the concrete, his face twisted with rage. His eyes locked on Scarlet like a predator closing in on its prey. For years, she had endured this fury behind closed doors, silenced and afraid. But tonight, there was no place to hide. Tonight, the entire world was watching. Scarlet's instincts screamed at her to retreat, to shrink back the way she had so many times before. But something inside her shifted. Maybe it was the child she carried, the tiny heartbeat reminding her she wasn't just protecting herself anymore. Maybe it was Gabriel, standing only a step away, his steady presence like a wall of strength. Or maybe it was the evidence in her clutch, the proof that Jonathan wasn't invincible. Whatever it was, Scarlet didn't run. She planted her feet. Jonathan lunged, his hand reaching for the envelope, his voice a growl. "You'll regret this, Scarlet. Give it to me." Scarlet's voice rang out, clear and steady. "No." The single word echoed across the loading dock, stronger than any scream. Jonathan froze mid-stride, stunned by her defiance. The crowd of staffers and guests erupted into whispers, their phones capturing every second. For once, Scarlet wasn't the silent wife. She was the woman standing against the monster. Her heart hammered, but her eyes never wavered. "You took my trust. You took my love. You tried to take my dignity, but you will never take my child's future. Not tonight. Not ever." Jonathan's face contorted with disbelief. He had built his entire life on power, control, dominance. And now, the woman he thought he owned stood unbroken before him. "You think you can beat me?" he snarled, his voice cracking. "You're nothing without me." Scarlet lifted her chin, her tears glistening, but her voice unwavering. "I was never nothing. You just never saw me." The words struck like a blade. Jonathan faltered, his rage colliding with confusion. For years, Scarlet's silence had been his weapon. Now, her voice was her shield. Gabriel stepped closer, ready to intervene if Jonathan struck. But Scarlet raised a hand, stopping him. This moment wasn't about Gabriel. It wasn't about the agents. It was about her. Jonathan's hand trembled as he reached again, but Scarlet didn't flinch. She pulled the envelope tight against her chest, her other hand pressed protectively over her belly. "You've already lost, Jonathan," she said, her tone final. "You just don't know it yet." The agent surged forward, but Jonathan thrashed, desperate for one last shred of control. He lunged again, his fist raised, not for the envelope this time, but for Scarlet herself. The crowd gasped. Gabriel moved, his muscles tensed to block the blow, but Scarlet stepped forward first. With a sudden, shocking clarity, she raised her voice, louder than the orchestra, louder than the chaos. "Stop!" she commanded. The word carried like thunder. For the first time in years, Jonathan froze, not because of force, but because of the sheer authority in Scarlet's voice. The crowd hushed, the agents halted, even Gabriel paused. Scarlet stared into Jonathan's eyes, unblinking. "Look at me. Look at what you've done. You don't scare me anymore, and you never will again." Her defiance shattered something in him. The power he wielded like a weapon crumbled under her gaze. His raised fist hovered in the air, trembling, then fell uselessly to his side. For the first time, Jonathan looked small. The agent seized the moment, grabbing him by the arms, forcing him to the ground as he kicked and screamed. Scarlet stood motionless, her chest heaving, her body trembling. but her spirit unshaken. Gabriel's hand brushed her arm, grounding her, his voice low and reverent. "Scarlet, you just won." Scarlet's eyes shimmered, her tears finally falling. But this time, they weren't tears of weakness. They were tears of release. And as Jonathan was dragged away in handcuffs, Cassandra slipped into the shadows, clutching her phone, already plotting her own betrayal. The chaos of Jonathan's arrest lingered in the loading dock like smoke after a fire. The federal agents forced him into a waiting car, his furious shouts muffled by the slam of steel doors. The crowd slowly dispersed, whispers buzzing about the empire that had just collapsed before their eyes. For the first time in years, Scarlet stood free of her husband's shadow. But freedom was never simple, not with Cassandra Monroe still lurking nearby. As the last of the agents cleared the dock, Scarlet leaned into Gabriel's steady presence, exhaustion sweeping over her. She thought it was over. She thought Jonathan's downfall would mean peace. She was wrong. Cassandra stepped forward, her heels clicking sharply against the concrete, her crimson gown catching the harsh fluorescent light. She looked less like a mistress in disgrace and more like a predator circling for her next kill. "Well, well," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. The pitiful wife finally found her voice. "Congratulations, Scarlet. You won yourself a headline, but do you really think this changes anything?" Scarlet straightened, her exhaustion giving way to defiance. "Jonathan's gone. It's over." Cassandra laughed, a cold, bitter sound. "Over? You think men like Jonathan go down alone? He may be in handcuffs, but his empire, his money, his allies, they don't vanish overnight. And guess what? I know where all the pieces are buried." Gabriel's gaze hardened, stepping between them protectively. "Careful, Cassandra. Your association with him doesn't make you powerful. It makes you complicit." That Cassandra's smirk deepened. "Oh, spare me the lecture, Knight. I was never stupid enough to sign my name on anything. Jonathan took the risks, I took the benefits, and now, with him out of the way, I can take more." Scarlet's stomach tightened. "What are you saying?" Cassandra's eyes glittered with malice. "I'm saying that envelope you're holding? It's dangerous. To Jonathan, to you, to anyone who touches it. You think those federal agents are your friends? They'll use you, Scarlet. They'll drag your name through the mud, paint you as the complicit wife who looked away while her husband robbed the world blind." Scarlet's breath caught. For a moment, doubt pierced her resolve. Was Cassandra right? Would exposing Jonathan also destroy her? Gabriel sensed her fear. He placed a reassuring hand on Scarlet's arm. "Don't listen to her. She's desperate. She's trying to twist the truth because she knows she's next." But Cassandra wasn't finished. She leaned in, her voice low and venomous. "Do you really think Gabriel can protect you forever? He may play the knight in shining armor, but men like him always want something. When he gets tired of saving you, Scarlet, you'll be alone again. And when that day comes, I'll be waiting to finish what Jonathan started." Scarlet's chest tightened, her anger sparking. She had endured enough cruelty for a lifetime, but Cassandra's words struck at her deepest wound. The fear of being abandoned, of raising her child in isolation. Gabriel stepped forward, his voice sharp. "That's enough." Cassandra's smirk faltered, but she held her ground. "You think this is the end of me? No, Gabriel. This is my beginning. Jonathan may be gone, but I'll inherit what's left of his empire. And when I do, Scarlet will wish she had never crossed me." Her heels clicked as she turned to leave, her gown sweeping dramatically behind her. The sound echoed like a threat etched into stone. Scarlet pressed the envelope tighter to her chest, her breath unsteady. Gabriel leaned close, his voice low but resolute. "She won't win, not while I'm here." But as Scarlet looked into his eyes, she couldn't shake the dread curling in her stomach, because Cassandra's warning carried a terrifying truth. The battle wasn't over. It was only changing shape. The city skyline glittered through the penthouse windows, but Scarlet's gaze lingered on the dark horizon. A week had passed since Jonathan's arrest, a week of endless headlines, investigations, and whispers that followed her everywhere. Yet in the quiet of Gabriel's home, far above the chaos, she finally felt something she hadn't in years. Safe. She sat curled on a velvet couch, her hands resting gently on her belly. The envelope of evidence lay locked in Gabriel's safe, guarded more carefully than gold. Margaret had testified, the agents had taken over, and Jonathan's empire was unraveling day by day. Cassandra had vanished into the shadows, her threats lingering like ghosts. But tonight, Scarlet allowed herself a breath of peace. Gabriel entered quietly, carrying 2 mugs of tea. He set one before her, his presence steady and grounding. "Chamomile," he said softly. It helped Elena when she couldn't sleep. Scarlet accepted the cup, touched by his thoughtfulness. "You still talk about her," she murmured. Gabriel's eyes softened with memory. "I'll always talk about her. She was part of who I am. But—" He paused, his gaze meeting Scarlet's. "She'd want me to keep living, to find love again, if it came." Scarlet's chest tightened, emotion rising. She had feared being nothing more than a replacement in Gabriel's life. But the honesty in his words, the way he carried Elena's memory without diminishing Scarlet's worth, it was healing in a way she hadn't expected. Silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable but filled with unspoken truths. Scarlet set her tea aside, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I'm ready for love again. Not yet. But I do know this. I want a life where I'm not afraid anymore. For me, for my child." Gabriel reached for her hand, his grip warm and protective. "And you'll have it, because you're not alone in this anymore." Scarlet's eyes brimmed with tears, but these weren't tears of pain. They were of release, of gratitude, of hope. For so long she had been silenced, dismissed, broken. Now she felt whole again, piece by fragile piece. Gabriel shifted, reaching into his pocket. Scarlet's breath caught as he pulled out a small velvet box. Her heart raced. "Gabriel," she whispered. He opened it slowly. Inside lay a ring, elegant and timeless, a single diamond set on a band engraved with delicate vines. Not flashy, not gaudy, but meaningful. "I'm not asking you to forget your pain," Gabriel said, his voice steady though his eyes glistened. "I'm asking you to let me walk beside you through it, to protect you, to love your child as my own, to build something real, out of honesty, respect, and choice. Will you let me?" Scarlet's breath trembled. For years, she had lived in a marriage that suffocated her, where vows were shackles instead of promises. And now, here was Gabriel, offering her not a cage, but wings. Her hand lifted to her belly, feeling the quiet movement of the life inside. She smiled through her tears. "Yes," she whispered, "I will." Gabriel slipped the ring onto her finger, his hands shaking with relief. He drew her close, pressing his forehead against hers. For the first time in years, Scarlet felt loved, not as an ornament, not as a possession, but as a woman, a mother, a survivor. The future was uncertain. Jonathan's trial loomed. Cassandra's schemes lingered, but Scarlet no longer faced them alone. She had Gabriel. She had her child. She had herself, stronger, braver, and freer than ever before. As the city lights sparkled below, Scarlet whispered a vow of her own. "No one will ever silence me again." And in that moment, the broken wife became the goddess she was always meant to be. So that's how the story closes. My dear friends, you're still here with me until now, aren't you? If you are, then something in Scarlet's journey has touched your heart in its own way. Maybe it's the pain of betrayal, maybe it's the courage to rise again, or maybe it's the reminder that, even in our darkest nights, there's always a dawn. The Stoic philosophers used to say, we cannot choose what happens to us, but we can always choose how we respond. Scarlet could not stop Jonathan's cruelty, but she chose dignity over despair. That choice, that inner strength, is something each of us carries inside, waiting to be awakened. Life will test us. People may hurt us. But healing begins the moment we remember our worth and decide not to be defined by the ones who tried to break us. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. If this story moved you, share it with someone who might need the reminder. Tap the like button, leave your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe, because together we're building a space where stories heal and hearts grow stronger. The chandeliers glittered like frozen stars above the grand ballroom, their light bouncing off crystal glasses and polished marble floors. This was no ordinary night. It was the Bright Futures Gala, the most prestigious event of the year. New York's elite were gathered, a sea of tuxedos and gowns worth more than most houses. The air carried the scent of imported roses and vintage champagne, a reminder that money ruled this room. But what no one expected was that tonight, beneath the glamour, a scandal would detonate like a bomb. At the center of the gala, billionaire Jonathan Colton commanded attention. Tall, confident, and wrapped in a designer tuxedo, he moved through the crowd with a smug grin plastered on his face. His hand was not on his wife's arm. It was on Cassandra Monroe's, a woman 10 years younger, dressed in a scarlet gown that hugged her figure like a second skin. Gasps rippled as Jonathan leaned in to whisper in her ear, introducing her to investors and board members as if she were his queen. Cameras clicked. Whispers traveled like wildfire. Everyone knew Jonathan was married. His wife, Scarlet Colton, was 6 months pregnant. Yet here he was, flaunting his mistress as though vows were nothing more than a business deal gone stale. Cassandra basked in the attention, her lips curling into a smile of triumph as she clung tighter to Jonathan's arm. She knew what she represented: power, youth, conquest. And she was shameless about it. Jonathan raised a glass to toast, his voice booming across the hall. "To new beginnings," he declared, the arrogance in his tone as sharp as broken glass. The guests forced polite laughter, though many exchanged uneasy glances. Even among billionaires, some lines weren't meant to be crossed in public. But Jonathan thrived on spectacle. He wanted the world to see him as untouchable. A man who could have it all: fortune, fame, and women. Just as the orchestra swelled with Mozart's Symphony No. 40, the doors at the far end of the ballroom swung open with a thunderous crash. Heads turned. A hush swept over the room. There, framed by the golden light of the corridor, stood Scarlet Colton. She wasn't the timid, forgotten wife Jonathan assumed would stay hidden at home. She was breathtaking, radiant and powerful in a white silk gown that draped elegantly over her swollen belly. Her hair shimmered under the chandeliers, her eyes sharp and steady, carrying the weight of betrayal yet refusing to break. Scarlet walked slowly, every step echoing on the marble like a drumbeat of judgment. Murmurs filled the silence. "Is that Scarlet? But she's pregnant. She looks like a goddess." Jonathan froze, his glass trembling in his hand. Cassandra's smile faltered as all eyes shifted away from her. In an instant, the mistress who had soaked in every ounce of attention was forgotten. The room now belonged to Scarlet. Every camera turned, every whisper grew louder. Scarlet's presence was not just a wife walking into a party. It was a reckoning. She stopped at the edge of the stage, her hand resting gently on her belly, and lifted her chin. For the first time in years, Jonathan Colton felt small. And for the first time tonight, Cassandra realized she was no longer the star of the show. Scarlet opened her mouth to speak, and the entire ballroom held its breath. Long before she stunned the gala with her entrance, Scarlet Colton had been a woman who believed in love above all else. She wasn't born into the glittering world of wealth and diamonds. Scarlet grew up in a modest neighborhood on the outskirts of Chicago, the daughter of a hard-working nurse and a mechanic who never made much money, but gave her endless love. Her parents taught her that kindness mattered more than titles, and integrity mattered more than wealth. From a young age, Scarlet dreamed of creating beauty. While other children scribbled cartoons, she designed floor plans of imaginary homes. She'd rearrange the furniture in their small living room just to see how light shifted across the walls. That passion carried her to a scholarship at a respected design school, where she studied interior architecture. She poured her heart into creating spaces that made people feel alive. She didn't chase luxury, she chased meaning. Then came Jonathan Colton. He was already rising in the tech world when their paths crossed. He noticed her at a design expo where Scarlet presented a project about affordable housing. She wore a simple dress, nothing that screamed for attention, yet Jonathan saw an opportunity. With his charm and relentless pursuit, he swept her into a whirlwind romance. For Scarlet, who had always lived humbly, Jonathan's grand gestures felt like a fairy tale. Roses delivered to her classroom. Dinners at rooftop restaurants she could never have afforded. Promises of forever whispered beneath city lights. When he proposed, Scarlet believed she was the luckiest woman alive. She gave up her small studio apartment, her freelance projects, and slowly, piece by piece, her independence. Jonathan insisted she didn't need to work, that her place was by his side. At first, it sounded like devotion. Later, it would reveal itself as control. The early years of their marriage shimmered with champagne and red carpets. Scarlet became the polished wife at his side, the one who smiled for photographs, the one magazines labeled graceful and supportive. Yet behind closed doors, cracks began to form. Jonathan's ambition grew ruthless. He spent more time in boardrooms than at home. He mocked Scarlet's desire to return to design work, telling her no one cared about her small dreams when she was married to a titan. And then, the pregnancy. For Scarlet, it was a miracle, the one thing she had longed for. For Jonathan, it was a burden, an inconvenience that clashed with his carefully curated image of freedom and power. He stopped coming to doctor appointments. He began working later, his excuses sharp and impatient. And when Scarlet confronted him, he turned the blame on her. "You're emotional, you're paranoid. Stop embarrassing me." Still, Scarlet clung to the hope that love would prevail. She told herself Jonathan was simply stressed, that fatherhood would soften him. But the late-night phone calls, the perfume lingering on his suits, and the whispered rumors from acquaintances carved at her heart. Deep down, she knew betrayal was already in her home. On the night of the Bright Futures Gala, Scarlet stayed in their mansion alone, staring at the designer gown Jonathan had told her not to wear. "Stay home," he'd said coldly. "The gala is business." But something inside her shifted. For months she had been silent, enduring humiliation in the shadows. That night, she refused to be invisible any longer. She slipped into the white silk gown, placed a protective hand over her belly, and told herself, "Tonight, the world will see me." And so, when she opened those ballroom doors, she wasn't just a pregnant wife. She was a woman rising from the ashes of betrayal, ready to reclaim her dignity. But what Scarlet didn't know was that an unexpected ally was already in the room, watching her every move. The Bright Futures Gala was not just another charity event, it was the crown jewel of New York's social calendar. Tickets cost more than most people's annual salary, and invitations were whispered about weeks in advance. For Jonathan Colton, it was the perfect stage. Tonight was supposed to be his triumph, a night where he paraded his power not only through his empire, but also through the woman on his arm. The ballroom itself was a masterpiece. Polished marble stretched endlessly, reflecting the glitter of crystal chandeliers that dripped light like molten diamonds. A live orchestra played Mozart, their instruments blending into a river of elegance that carried across the room. Towering arrangements of Dutch tulips and white orchids adorned each table, their fragrance mingling with the scent of aged champagne. Every detail screamed of extravagance. This was wealth not hidden, but flaunted. At the center, Jonathan basked in attention. With Cassandra Munro pressed close to his side, he was the sun around which lesser stars orbited. CEOs, senators, and celebrities leaned in to greet him, pretending not to notice the scandalous substitution of his wife. Cassandra thrived under the scrutiny. Her crimson gown shimmered with each step, deliberately bold against the muted gowns around her. She whispered in Jonathan's ear, laughed a little too loudly, and allowed photographers to capture her triumphant smirk. Guests exchanged glances. Some pitied Scarlet, others simply gossiped. But none dared challenge Jonathan publicly. He was, after all, a man who had clawed his way from nothing to billions, and power excused almost anything in this room. Almost. And then came the shift. The grand doors opened, and Scarlet appeared. She did not rush, nor did she falter. Her gown of white silk shimmered with each graceful step, her presence slicing through the opulence like a blade. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Glasses hovered mid-air. For a heartbeat, even the orchestra stumbled before recovering. The atmosphere changed instantly. Scarlet, 6 months pregnant, carried herself with such dignity that whispers rose like wildfire. She came. She looks incredible. She doesn't even look broken. Cameras turned away from Cassandra, their flashes bursting like lightning across Scarlet's calm face. Jonathan's smile stiffened, his fingers tightening around his champagne glass until it nearly cracked. Cassandra's confident posture wilted under the weight of Scarlet's presence. For months, she had been the secret no one dared expose. Tonight, she was being erased in real time. Scarlet moved with deliberate grace across the ballroom. She wasn't just entering a party, she was reclaiming her place, her name, her worth. She paused in the center, her hand resting protectively on her belly, as if reminding everyone of the life she carried, a life Jonathan had carelessly discarded in pursuit of vanity. The silence grew unbearable until Jonathan forced a laugh, raising his voice to pierce the tension. "Ladies and gentlemen," he boomed. "What a surprise. My wife decided to join us after all." His words dripped with sarcasm, but the tremor in his tone betrayed him. Scarlet didn't flinch. Her eyes locked on Jonathan's, steady, unyielding. "Yes," she said softly, yet her voice carried across the hall. "Your wife decided she wouldn't be hidden tonight." The room erupted in murmurs, the orchestra falling into awkward silence. Every guest could feel it, the balance of power shifting before their eyes. Cassandra shrank back, realizing her role was crumbling with each passing second. Jonathan's jaw tightened, his pride unraveling as Scarlet stood tall, radiant, and unafraid. But while Jonathan fumbled for control and Cassandra wilted in the shadows, another man in the ballroom watched Scarlet with quiet intensity. His name was Gabriel Knight, a billionaire who never flaunted his fortune. Unlike Jonathan, his wealth came with humility, and unlike Cassandra, his gaze carried respect, not hunger. And as Scarlet stood in the spotlight, Gabriel knew this was the moment fate had led him to, though Scarlet herself had no idea yet. Jonathan Colton had always believed he could bend reality to his will. Deals bent to his signature, employees bent to his temper, and the public bent to his carefully crafted image. Tonight, however, the illusion began to crack. Scarlet's presence in the ballroom was a direct threat to the empire of arrogance he had built, and Jonathan wasn't the kind of man who backed down. He tightened his arm around Cassandra's waist, pulling her closer, as though doubling down on his betrayal could erase the humiliation. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice louder now, dripping with false cheer, "allow me to introduce Cassandra Monroe. She has been an inspiration, a partner in more ways than one." The words landed like a grenade. Gasps rippled through the ballroom. A senator's wife dropped her fork with a clatter. A reporter's hand shot instinctively toward her phone. Jonathan had not only brought his mistress to a gala, he had crowned her in public, right in front of his pregnant wife. Cassandra leaned into the moment, her lips curved into a calculated smile, her hand trailing across Jonathan's chest as if to mark territory. "It's such an honor," she purred, her eyes darting toward Scarlet with open malice. Jonathan deserves someone who can truly stand beside him. The insult was sharp, deliberate. Scarlet's chest tightened, but she refused to bow. Instead, she lifted her chin, her eyes meeting Cassandra's with a calm steel that cut deeper than any retort. She didn't need to scream. Her silence alone was devastating. Yet Jonathan couldn't stand it. The way Scarlet's poise threatened his authority. He stepped forward, gesturing grandly toward Cassandra. "Scarlet, you've had your time. You've played the role of wife well enough, but this..." He looked at Cassandra with pride. "This is the future." The audacity was staggering. Guests whispered furiously, torn between horror and fascination. They had seen affairs before, scandals whispered in corners, but never such a brazen betrayal broadcast in public. Scarlet's hand instinctively went to her belly, grounding herself in the presence of the child she carried. She wanted to scream, to demand how Jonathan could stand there so shamelessly. But instead, she whispered to herself, "Dignity. Hold on to dignity." Across the room, cameras flashed. Jonathan basked in the attention, mistaking shock for admiration. Cassandra clung to him, but beneath her smile there was unease. She hadn't expected Scarlet to show up, and certainly not like this. Radiant, composed, and glowing with the quiet power of motherhood. Scarlet finally spoke, her voice carrying through the hall, though it was barely louder than a breath. "You parade her in front of me? In front of our child?" The room froze. Jonathan smirked, arrogance dripping from every word. "Our child will grow up in privilege. What matters is strength, not sentiment." It was the final crack in Scarlet's illusion of marriage. Every sacrifice, every compromise, every quiet night she had spent alone, reduced to nothing by his cruelty. Her eyes shimmered, but she refused to let tears fall. Not here. Not for him. The orchestra faltered into silence, and for a moment the gala was no longer about charity or prestige. It was about the battlefield of a marriage collapsing before hundreds of witnesses. But while Jonathan strutted and Cassandra smirked, another presence lingered on the edges of the crowd. Gabriel Knight, his expression unreadable, studied Scarlet. He saw not weakness, but extraordinary courage. He had known betrayal himself. He had known loss. And in Scarlet's quiet defiance, he recognized a strength that deserved protection. As Scarlet stood alone against Jonathan's humiliation, Gabriel began to move forward, ready to change everything with a single step.